On the night of July the 18th, 1887, while Edison and his boys were in the lab testing a diaphragm from the telephone transmitter, Edison made a momentous discovery.
Playing in the laboratory one night, and as they were playing with the diaphragm, he put his finger under it and realized that there was enough movement there that he might be able to cause an impression in a piece of wax paper or something else that would allow him to, in a sense, repeat the message, to play it once it was recorded, to play it back so it could continue over the line.
That night, Edison scribbled in his notebook, "There is no doubt that I should be able to store up and reproduce automatically at any future time the human voice perfectly." Full of confidence, Edison thought he would invent a kind of telephone answering and repeating machine, but he was actually about to invent something far more original, the world's first phonograph. When Edison thought about the phonograph, he knew he wasn't the first person to record sound. A Frenchman named Edward Leo Scott Damatov had already done that 20 years before on a machine he called the phonograph. But what Edison didn't know was another Frenchman, Charles Cross, had recently written a paper describing how to play back sound as well as to record it. But what Crow conceived, Thomas Edison achieved, with a little help from Charles Batchelor, a British-born draftsman, mechanic, and problem solver, and John Cruzy, a Swiss-born master machinist.
On September 7th, he sits down and draws up what's essentially a list of possible things he can do with the phonograph. They're all things we would be familiar with today, but this marks the beginning of the phonograph as a completely separate technology. Well, Alexander Graham Bell, when he heard about the phonograph, was astounded that he hadn't thought of it. So after Edison had given it up, Gardner Hubbard, who was one of the leading principals of the Edison Speaking Phonograph Company and also Bell's father-in-law, pushed him into working on this device and trying to make it a practical instrument so that, in fact, they could exploit it.
Fast forward to today, and a lot has changed. We no longer really own music, we just stream it. Streaming is almost entirely responsible for getting the industry back on track. But the question is, can streaming take it back to its prime after fundamentally changing the way we get it? Thomas Edison's invention meant that for the first time, people could listen to music from the comfort of their own homes, and it could be shared and sold. Effects of the phonograph have been thoroughly examined by many enthusiasts, including Mark Katz of the University of North Carolina. He claims that the phonograph changed music in two very significant ways. First, it changed the way music was played. In terms of recording, early records were just, well, terrible. The most important contribution to music in regards to the phonograph was the exposure to more music. Prior to the phonograph, you would only hear music if it was performed locally, otherwise it was unavailable. This broke barriers between Europe and America, the city and the country, and race. People would sneak records that were socially unacceptable and listen at home. White America had access to authentic black culture through jazz and blues records. This played a role in the healing of race relations in the US. We know when the advances in recording technology continued throughout the 20th century, all of them proving to be largely significant, but none could be significant as the one that launched music as an industry, the initial sound recording machine, the phonograph. Over the next 5 decades, the phonograph took different forms, from the cylinder shape to a flat disc until finally being replaced by In 1948, Columbia Records introduced the long play, allowing for multiple songs on one record. Vinyl remained the dominant recording format for most of the 20th century.
Go, Johnny, go, go! Everybody, let's rock! The ring of fire.
And as rock and rolls, blues, and country kicked off, sales bloomed and albums sold out. But by the late 50s, new technology would again rock the industry. But it would be Sony that changed the game with the iconic Walkman. With the Walkman, listeners could take music with them whenever and wherever.
The music with the Sony Walkman.
The Sony Walkman.
But with the rise of digital era came the unraveling of the cassette. The compact disc was revolutionary for the music industry. It gave consumers access to more music of a higher quality, and it helped artists build their fan bases and become a successful part of the music industry. The CD, for the first time, enabled us to listen to digital music. With the iconic iPod and MP3 players, the industry did see a boost from digital downloads, but wasn't enough to make up for the dwindling physical format sales, and artists were forced to tour more to bring in the dough. Meanwhile, streaming was just getting started. Some companies introduced subscription models with limited music libraries, while others, like Pandora, operated as internet radio stations with ads. But the breakthrough came in 2011. Swedish startup Spotify managed to do what others could not. Licensed a vast library of music. Instead of buying and owning songs and albums, we started listening to ads or paying monthly fees in exchange for access to essentially all the music in the world. Over the years, there was an explosion of new services. If history is any clue, it won't be long before new technology shakes everything up again.